Hello and welcome to Policy Watch. This week we have Mohan, Guruswamy, Economist and Distinguished Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation on the show. Many thanks for joining us, Mr. Guruswamy. This is your first time on the show and I look forward to chatting with you in just a bit. But before Mohan and I get chatting, let's get you our first story. The United States seems to have averted going over the fiscal cliff. US lawmakers have approved tax hikes on the rich and spending cuts on Tuesday night to avert an economic crisis that could have had a global impact. The deal has finally averted economic calamity that would have pushed the world's largest economy off the fiscal cliff into recession. President Barack Obama welcomed the bipartisan deal. We file a report. Take a look.
Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Ending a dramatic New Year's Day showdown over income taxes and deep federal spending cuts, the Congress passed the fiscal bill deal on Tuesday night. The passage ended fears of the US going over the fiscal cliff that could have pushed it into recession and also affected the global economy. By a vote of 257 to 167, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives approved a bill that fulfills President Barack Obama's re-election promise to raise taxes on wealthy Americans and spare the middle class.
Tonight, we've done that. Thanks to the votes of Democrats and Republicans in Congress, I will sign a law that raises taxes on the wealthiest 2% of Americans while preventing a middle-class tax hike that could have sent the economy back into recession and obviously had a severe impact on families all across America.
The bill, which was passed by the Senate on the New Year's Day, would now go to the White House for the president to sign it into a law. Speaking shortly after the vote, Obama vowed to avoid a repeat of last year's decisive fight with Congress over an extension of the nation's borrowing authority.
I will not have another debate with this Congress over whether or not they should pay the bills that they have already racked up through the laws that they passed. Let me repeat. We can't not pay bills that we've already incurred. If Congress refuses to give the United States government the ability to pay these bills on time, the consequences for the entire global economy would be catastrophic, far worse than the impact of a fiscal collapse.
Vice President Joe Biden, who played a key role in negotiating a deal with the Republicans, stood by Obama's side as he spoke in the White House press room. Tuesday's vote was a reversal for House Republicans, who were in disarray, winning deep spending cuts in earlier budget fights. But this time they were unable to unite behind an alternative to Obama's proposal.
We are working hard to pull ourselves back from that cliff. We went over the cliff and we're pulling ourselves back.
House Speaker John Boehner and other Republican House leaders stayed silent during the debate on the House floor, an unusual move for a major vote. Boehner backed the deal, but many of his top lieutenants voted against it. The deal shatters 2 decades of Republican anti-tax orthodoxy by raising rates on the wealthiest, even as it makes cuts for everybody else permanent. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
There you go, Obama getting the deal through. On the face of it, Mr. Guruswamy, neither side, neither the Democrats nor the Republicans are really happy with the deal, but they're not happy with the compromise deal. But this deal was really crucial, wasn't it? It came at the right time. If there had been no deal, there was a big danger of the US economy going into recession.
I don't know about recession, but certainly it would come to a halt because, there'd be no money to pay tomorrow.
Right.
And including the president's salary was in doubt.
Right.
But I think it's a compromise which has left nobody satisfied because the president was really hoping for a reduction of about $1 trillion. And that he hasn't got. He's got only 60% of that.
$600 billion.
$650 billion, all told. And that is not going to stop the United States from getting off the road it is on. It'll probably slow down that pace. Right. But at the trajectory the US is moving, its debt to GDP ratio is about 80% now, and it's going to be headed towards 90% in the next 5 years. And many economists say that it will be 200% in the next 25 years.
It's not good news for anyone.
That is unsustainable. The United States, this is only the government debt. Every citizen in the United States is in debt. The total private debt in the United States is $2.6 trillion. They're maxed on credit cards, they're maxed on bank loans, they're maxed on everything. And apart from that, there is a legacy debt, on social service security, social services, pensions, all that, which adds up to another 50 trillion.
Right.
So, where is the money going to come from?
It's a mountain of debt.
It's huge. Absolutely humongous.
Also, we're talking about how people are not really happy with the deal. 3 Democrats voted no. Liberal Senator Tom Harkin of Iowa said, and I quote him, "If you make $250,000 a year, you're not middle class. You're in the top 2% of income earners in India." He also said, and I quote, "No deal is better than a bad deal, and this certainly looks like a bad deal." Does he have a point?
Well, you know, he's exaggerating. He's a well-known liberal, Tom Harkins from Iowa. I know he's not Iowa, somewhere else, but he's certainly a well-known liberal, and you know he would not be satisfied. But I think there is a point also. The rich people in the United States pay relatively low taxes, and there's a philosophy here. The Republicans, for instance, say that rich people create jobs, rich people create wealth.
That's a conservative Republican line of thinking.
And the Democrats have the opposite view, that you must provide poor people with minimum support,
Security cover,
social security, welfare, all that stuff, unemployment, training, to get them up. The bottom line is that neither of them are going to work unless, you get both cuts in spending and raise taxes.
Tax rates,
The US tax to GDP ratio is 19%, 19% on a GDP of about 14 trillion almost. It doesn't even cover the budget.
So,
So that means they have to borrow.
Right.
The problem with the United States is the debt is piling up.
right.
And interest costs are piling up. Thankfully, their interest costs are low. For instance, they hardly pay China any interest on that 2.8 trillion debt they owe China.
Right.
But they just can't afford it anymore.
Right.
And you don't have the dominance over the world as
Right.
you had before. Also, this is important for the world that they get their economy into order, because they still account for 22% of world GDP.
And a US economy in crisis would mean really bad news for the rest of the world.
Yeah, and the truth is that all of us are dependent on US bad economic behavior. All of us take advantage of the trade deficit. They post year after year.
Yeah.
China has a trade surplus with the United States of about 300 billion. Even India has a trade surplus with the United States on merchandise trade.
Right.
So, the US just keeps printing bills. And as it keeps printing more dollars, there is a dollar deflation taking place all over the world. And that also affects us. So I think, they need to get their act together. I think the international community has an obligation to jawbone the US economy into shape and tell them that this far and no more. Just as the IMF does it to other countries. They did it
They
to
should
us
do it to
also.
the US.
They should do it to the US.
Yes, fair point. And I completely agree with that. I want to talk about a little more on the political side of the issue. The biggest losers, according to a lot of economists and a lot of other political watchers, are the conservative Republicans. They had vowed not to let this deal go through, or the super rich get taxed, or the top 2% of Americans, like they said, and they lost this particular battle. Now, for the first time in 2 decades, the super rich have got a 2% increase on taxes that they have to pay now. This is 2 decades after in America. This was long overdue. Do we agree?
I agree. And 2% is very little.
Very little. It should have been more.
It should be much more. There is an entitlement for the economy and for the state on the incomes people make. And I think they're not getting that full entitlement.
Last question on this particular issue. We mentioned that Obama wanted to save about $1.6 trillion over the next decade.
Yeah.
He's only going to save about $650 billion or thereabouts. And the deal, most importantly, does not raise the debt ceiling. It does not raise America's debt ceiling. So America still faces, it might have avoided a fiscal cliff, so to say, but it faces a huge mountain ahead now.
It does. The problem with politics, the problem with partisan politics like you have in the US, where it's kind of a take no prisoners kind of politics, compromises are very difficult to come. And compromises, when they come, is always a case of too little, too late.
Is this such a case? Too little,
I
too late?
think so. Yeah. I think so. I think the US is headed towards the abyss. I mean, you jumped off the cliff and came onto a ledge at the moment.
And the ledge is wobbly.
The ledge is wobbly and there's still an abyss down below.
Right.
And I think it's very difficult to get off that ledge now, unless there are more ledges available.
Right.
The only way out is to build a bridge, or reverse your track back.
Right.
And that means United States people have to learn to live with low standards of living, a lot of these things, which they're not ready for as yet.
They're not equipped for it.
They're not ready. There's a feeling in the United States among common people that everybody owes them this place in the world. And this place in the world rightly belongs to them.
Whether they have earned it or not,
Whether they've earned it or not is not
it's
the
just
question.
anybody's guess. We'll take a small break right now. We'll come back with a second story after the break. Don't go anywhere. More with Mohan Guruswamy on the other side of this break. Keep watching Policy Watch. Welcome back to Policy Watch. Now, Finance Minister P Chidambaram has hinted at cutting gold imports to bolster weak external accounts that have brought back memories of a 1991 currency crisis. The move may come in the wake of a rising current account deficit. The latest data shows that the deficit widening to 5.4% of the GDP in the September quarter, mainly due to falling exports. The gap has weakened the rupee and exposed the economy to costlier imports. The finance minister has also said the government is considering reining in imports of gold used as an investment tool, which comes as a drain on foreign currency reserves. The minister, though, refused to divulge the extent of duty hike on gold imports. In 1991, if you remember, the current account deficit had hit 3% of the GDP, and India came within weeks of running out of foreign currency. It was forced to airlift some gold stocks back then to Europe to secure loans. Chidambaram hoped foreign investment flows should be able to finance the deficit without drawing on hard currency reserves. That's enough for 7 months of imports. Mr. Guruswamy, we talked about it before also. I think we were having a chat a couple of days ago. Gold imports getting, costlier seems to be, at least on the face of it, a slightly short-term solution for a much larger problem. Do you agree?
I agree. But there is an immediate problem also. You can't keep importing $71 billion of gold a year. I mean, that is absolutely unproductive income, expenditure. It just goes and sits buried in the ground somewhere. Okay? And it has no multiplier effect, no utility to the economy after that. It's money gone out. So, some of this gold, of course, gets transformed into jewelry and there's a little value addition on it, but it's not
most
much.
of it is lying dormant.
Most of it lies dormant. And there are huge speculations on how much of gold is buried under the ground in India. But just to give you an idea, I think last year or the last 6 months, we imported something like 225 tons of gold. So, if you're doing this for year after year, and this is money lost to the economy.
And the government has increased gold duty 4 months ago also. Is that the only way of making sure that CAD doesn't run away?
That probably is the only way, unless you ban it. If you ban it, then there'll be smuggling. Then,
but I don't think the government wants to ban it.
I don't think you can ban it. I don't think the government has a wherewithal to control smuggling. Even if there's a 10% spread, the guys in Dubai will get into the act.
Right, away.
Mind you, whole of Dubai was built on smuggling gold to India.
Absolutely.
Okay? So, they're not going to give up this chance again. Okay? So, you can't increase duties beyond a point. You've got 4% already now.
Maybe a couple of percentage.
Maybe another 3%, but you can put certain limits on how much each passenger can bring and things like that.
Right.
But, why is this happening? People have no confidence in the stock market.
Absolutely.
The stock market has been taken over completely by speculators, by fraudsters and crooks, and you can see this day after day. This, in the manipulations in the market, you don't have such spikes in any stock market in the world. It just keeps going up and down. FDI has come, they, push the prices up, book the profits, take the money out.
It's not the natural progression of the stock market. It's manipulated.
It's manipulated, absolutely manipulated. We should be looking at regulating the stock market. Long overdue to have a Tobin tax. Chidambaram tried it, and the hue and cry came with the commas, everybody, and he backed off. I think he has got the right ideas on this. I think he has to get the political support and the courage to carry them through.
Now that he's finance minister, he's starting to exercise some of his views, opinions on particular matters. But like you just said, there is a lack of political will, and he might not be able to get the political will on his side.
Well, I think, sometimes political will is forced by circumstances. When your back is to the wall, then you suddenly have reserves of political will available because there's nothing else available with you.
Right.
So I think, I think he's come to that stage. He has to take hard decisions. And I'm sure a man with his education and intellect and background knows what to do.
Right, right.
You know.
We agree that the problem here, of course, is the runaway CAD, the current account deficit. There's also a view that it's our exports also that are pulling us down. Our exports have fallen in recent months. The view goes that we need to expand our export basket, and our trade with regions like, you mentioned Dubai, like the Middle East and the Gulf countries, has also fallen. That's also a way of ensuring the CAD doesn't really run away, getting our exports back on track.
We must wonder why
Why
United Arab Emirates is India's biggest export market.
Why is that?
Where is that exports going? How much of it is being retained back? These are questions which should be looked into. And it's worrisome. I have a good feeling that a good part of this exporters' earnings is retained abroad, and therefore this is a facilitator for that. But overall trend is that merchandise exports are not growing the way they should,
Right.
in spite of the devaluation.
Do you think our exporters lack the incentives they need?
Exporters have enough incentives. I think maybe a few incentives here and there, a little less of red tape, and things that are always called. But I think really calls for a look at our productivity, the cost at which we produce goods, and what do we export. And the emphasis should be on manufactured rather than on iron ore. Iron ore accounted for a good part of
Manufacturing has
exports.
also fallen in the past.
Manufacturing has also fallen, but I think the last 6 months there's been some upward
Some
trend.
correction, yeah.
But I think we should be able to compete in the world market with our exports.
Right, right.
I can't see why India can't become a larger automobile exporter. After all, these cars are made by Ford and Hyundai and all. They're all world-class cars.
If we can manufacture automobile components, why can't we?
Absolutely.
We're
I think
one of the biggest component
we
manufacturers.
should export more of that. There are lots of industries. For instance, you can't export garments. I looked at garment exports which are dropping off because you don't get good fabrics here. So there's a need for upgradation of the textile industry as well.
Right.
So there's lots of things you need to do, and also this whole idea of this government had of export promotion zones. I think you need to revive them, and you make exports competitive. You don't fetter production with all kinds of stupid regulations and restrictions. And Ratan Tata used the term silly taxes.
Right.
But I think there are lots of silly taxes which need to go, and you need to encourage people who export, who earn money from abroad and bring money back from abroad. All these people have to be rewarded.
Slightly related question with the gold and the current account deficit. Where do you see what is the outlook on the rupee? Do you see it further strengthening or weakening?
On the face of it, I can't see how it can strengthen further.
It looks unlikely.
It looks unlikely. I'm looking at maybe this year, we probably end this year at about 60. At the trend we're going,
Which is probably an all-time high.
It's all-time high and it'll probably go higher unless you reverse this trend.
Right.
This is our fiscal cliff.
This is our fiscal cliff, our particular fiscal cliff.
Everybody has a unique fiscal cliff. This is ours.
Absolutely.
And we need to handle this.
Absolutely. And this is the time to
if you're importing, if oil imports cover 50-60% of your total exports, and you account for
then you're going over the fiscal cliff in a car.
you're in bad trouble.
Absolutely.
And there's a need for increasing the fuel prices, reducing the consumption in tonnages, and there are lots of things which you need to do.
Absolutely. On this particular note, we'll take another break. We'll come back with a third story. There's another segment left on Policy Watch. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Policy Watch. The government's ambitious direct benefits transfer DBT scheme was rolled out in 20 districts on January 1 as against the earlier plan of covering 51 districts. Finance Minister P Chidambaram on Monday said that the government is proceeding with a great degree of caution and will watch every step. By March 1, the government will cover 43 districts in the country under the DBT. In the first phase, 20 districts will be covered, providing direct transfer of benefits into bank accounts for over 2 lakh beneficiaries. From February 1, 11 more districts will be covered, and the remaining 12 districts will be covered from March 1. Because of the state elections, the government was not able to prepare the basic framework for direct transfer in 8 districts of Gujarat and Himachal Pradesh, and hence the scheme will be rolled out in 43 districts initially. We'd file a report. Take a look.
The government's much-touted direct cash transfer scheme will be rolled out in 20 districts from January 1st, 2013. Another 11 districts will see the scheme launched from February 1st and 12 from March 1st. The implementation will be in just 7 schemes starting January 1st. A total of 26 schemes are to be covered under the plan, but food, fertilizer and fuel subsidies will not be covered in the initial phase. The system will be rolled out in various schemes according to the due date of payment.
We intend to proceed with a great degree of caution, watching every step so that we don't make any mistake and we don't stumble.
The Finance Minister also said that by the end of 2013, the direct cash transfer scheme will be rolled out in all districts of the country. He said the subsidies would be transferred to the beneficiaries' bank accounts even if they do not have an Athar number.
We are confident that the monies under these schemes will be successfully credited to the bank account of the beneficiary.
The government had earlier planned to launch the scheme in 51 districts across the country, but that plan had to be postponed due to problems in implementation. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Finally, that ambitious plan on track. The direct cash transfer system, highly ambitious plan. The government started with much pomp and show, was eventually forced to scale back, but myriad of problems. Only 20 districts to be part of it in the first phase. First phase, thoughts on the efficacy of the direct benefits?
See, on the face of it, could have been a game changer.
This could have been a game changer. That's something I keep hearing.
Yeah, and but how can you have a scheme which doesn't take into account subsidies like on food, fertilizer and kerosene?
Right.
So what are you saving? So you are incurring an additional expenditure in those 20 districts and not getting a commensurate saving on these subsidies. So it doesn't make sense.
So would you say that getting those subsidies like fertilizer, food and fuel under the ambit or inside the ambit of this particular would have been more effective?
Absolutely. That was the idea, that the subsidies don't get into the hands of people who
Don't deserve
need it, who deserve it, and it gets stopped in between. So you cut off that and put it directly into people's bank accounts. In theory, it would have meant that you go to the market and buy wheat at market price.
Right, but it's still a start. The government.
Yeah, but if you are going to get subsidized wheat and then you get money into your bank, you're not going to be happy when you have to pay for market price wheat, maybe 5 years from now.
Right.
And it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Why you get two-way subsidy?
Right.
So why benefit only 20 districts then?
Right.
There are lots of issues here. But with the kind of government structure we have, one must wonder if any of these things are going to succeed. I was trying to get a driving license renewed the other day, and it's all computerized. But the way this system works, that unless they collect some rent, it doesn't move.
So it's a bigger problem than
you have a license in New Delhi, South Delhi, and then you have to go to Old Delhi to get your police verification.
Right. So our system, of course, and that's a larger question. We'll talk about that sometime. But the silver lining in this particular one, to me at least, is the fact that people who do not have an Aadhaar card or an Aadhaar account number, they will also get the cash in their bank accounts. That's going to help a little.
It will help somewhat. It will help, but it won't help government coffers. Already your subsidies are at all-time high. 100,000 crores on food subsidy, another 120,000 crores on fertilizer subsidy, kerosene subsidy, 36,000, 40,000 crores. It's all just piling on.
So it might be good populism-wise, but economically it's not that. It's not going to help.
It's not going to work. It'll create more problems. And I think already 20% of our GDP is in subsidies.
So perhaps in some time, perhaps in a while, food, fertilizer and fuel could be gotten under the ambit. That's something the government
I think you should bring it all into the ambit and do it on a big bang.
Right.
If you were doing piloting, test marketing, you do it in one district.
Right.
And check it out and finish it out.
Right.
Do it in 5 districts after that, finish it out. And I think Aadhaar is the Aadhaar of this. You need to have Aadhaar cards in everybody's hands.
Absolutely. On that note, sir, we'll end our show. Many thanks, Mohan Guruswamy, for joining us on Policy Watch. That was Mohan Guruswamy, economist and distinguished fellow at the ORF, Observer Research Foundation, who was our guest on the show. Today, this week on Policy Watch, our first story was the United States has got a deal, a bipartisan deal. They seem to have averted going over the fiscal cliff, but like my guest today said, they have a mountain of debt to cover. That, of course, they've seem to have landed on a wedge which is still wobbly, and Barack Obama is going to have a very difficult 4 years ahead of him. Our second story on Policy Watch this week was Finance Minister Chidambaram announcing that cutting gold imports, maybe a hike on gold imports, that's the way to check the runaway current account deficit. There are other ways, of course. We have to get our exports in shape, like my guest said, make our exports more competitive. We don't see why we can't be more competitive, expand our crude basket. Those are the steps we might need to take, and that's our second story. The third story on Policy Watch this week, of course, was the ambitious direct benefits transfer, or DBT scheme, that was rolled out in 20 districts as of January 1. Other districts will come in after February and March. But like my guest, of course, said, keeping food, fertilizer and fuel out of the ambit of this particular scheme perhaps defeats the very reason why this was put into place. That could be a self-defeating reason. There could be a case for the government to consider putting those three, food, fertilizer and fuel subsidies, under the ambit of this particular scheme. That's all the time we have on Policy Watch this particular week. Athar Khan saying goodbye, good night, and thank you for watching.